Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my May book wish list video. I have quite a few books to talk to you about today. It's another bumper month, so I've got 29 books to talk to you about, so I'm not going to spend too long on them, so this isn't the longest video in the world, but I will talk to you about all the books that I added to my wish list this month. So the first book that I have to talk to you about today is Born Wicked, and this is by Jessica Spotswood, and I first heard about this in Karen from Wallaby Reading's April mid-month wrap-up, and I believe she's read the whole trilogy now and she quite enjoyed it. And this, I believe, is a YA paranormal trilogy, and it has to do with witches. And I don't know whether it's set in the future or whether it's got a historical setting, but it just sounded good and Karen really enjoyed it, so I added it to my wish list, and actually I can get this one from the library, which is great. Next up is Fire for Fire by Jenny Han and Siobhan Vivian. This is the second book in the Burn for Burn trilogy. I read Burn for Burn in April, and so I quite enjoyed that one and I wanted to continue on, so I put the second book on my wish list. Next up is Wildwood, and this is by Colin Malloy and Carson Ellis, and I heard about this one on Jen Campbell's channel. She did an updated bookshelf tour for 2018, and she was sort of picking off of her shelf a few of her favourites from every sort of shelf that she showed, and this was one that I added to my wish list. And this is, I believe, the start of a trilogy, and I think it's sort of like fairy tale retelling-esque sort of trilogy, so it's sort of like fantasy, but it's got this kind of like fairy tale setting to it. Jen doesn't really read a lot of fantasy as far as I'm aware, so when I saw that she really enjoyed this one, I thought I would give it a go, because I'm not too big of a fantasy fan either, so I think this would be something I might enjoy. Another one from that bookshelf tour of Jen's was A Tale for the Time Being, and this is by Ruth Haseki. And I've heard a few things about Ruth Haseki before, but I've never really had the sort of urge to add one of her books to my wish list. But then I saw Jen talking about this one, so I thought I would give it a go. I'll just read you a few bits of the description of this. It's set in Tokyo, and we follow 16-year-old Nao, I think that's how you pronounce that, and she's decided there's only one escape from her aching loneliness and her classmates' bullying. Before she ends it all, Nao plans to document the life of her great-grandmother, a Buddhist nun who's lived more than a century. A diary is Nao's only solace and will touch lives in ways she can scarcely imagine. Across the Pacific, we meet Ruth, a novelist living on a remote island who discovers a collection of artefacts washed ashore in a Hello Kitty lunchbox, possibly debris from the devastating 2011 tsunami. As the mystery of its contents unfolds, Ruth is pulled into the past, into Nao's drama and her unknown fate, and forward into her own future. So we've got like the two different timelines there, and obviously we've got Tokyo and across the Pacific, so maybe it's America somewhere, and the kind of uncovering of that mystery, and that just sounded really good. Next up we have The Book of Negroes, and this is by Lawrence Hill, and I heard about this one from April over at Getting Hygge With It. She hauled this, I think, in April at some point, and this seems like it's a historical fiction book. And it says in the blurb, abducted from her West African village at the age of 11 and sold as a slave in the American South, Aminata Diallo thinks only of freedom and of finding her way home again. After escaping the plantation, torn from her husband and child, she passes through Manhattan in the chaos of the Revolutionary War, is shipped to Nova Scotia, and then joins a group of freed slaves on a harrowing return odyssey to Africa. So apparently this is based on a true story, and the novel spans 3 continents and 6 decades to bring to life a dark and shameful chapter in our history. So I thought that sounded really interesting and that I would learn an awful lot from that, so I added it to my wish list as well. Next up is All the Little Pieces, and this is by Julian Hoffman, and this was a subscriber recommendation. So Doreen, one of my subscribers, recommended this as a good thriller that I might like. I don't really like to know too much about thrillers going into them, so I haven't really read any of the premise of this, but she really recommended it, and I thought, well, I'd add it to my wish list and I'll pick it up at some point as a great thriller recommendation. Next up is Wonder Women, and this is by Sam Maggs, and I got this recommendation from Kate over at Girl Reading, and she talked about this in her April wrap up, and I believe this is a bit of an anthology, so a collection of little sort of stories about particular women in history. I've just read Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls and really enjoyed it, so I think this is sort of in the same vein as that, and it sounded really good, so I thought I would give that one a go. Next up is Places I Stopped on the Way Home by Meg Fee, and this was a Twitter recommendation from Lucy Pearson, and she's over at the Lit Edit, and her blog is called the Lit Edit as well, and she was tweeting about this book and saying how much she really enjoyed it. So this is a non-fiction memoir, and this says it's from an exciting young writer, Meg Fee, on finding her way in New York City. So Meg Fee plots a decade of her life in New York City, from falling in love at the Lincoln Center to escaping the roommate and bedbugs from hell on Thompson Street, chasing false promises on 66th Street and the wrong men everywhere, and finding true friendships over glasses of wine in Harlem and Greenwich Village. And what I was particularly drawn to about this book was the fact that it was set in New York. I've talked about before that I love books set in New York, so this one sounded excellent and I thought I would add it as well. Next up is a book called The Stolen Bicycle, and this is by Woo Ming Yi, and this was on the Man Book International shortlist this year, and I first heard about this over at Lauren's channel, and she's from Reads and Daydreams, and this was in her spring book haul. I thought it sounded really interesting. So this says, Sheng, a novelist, once wrote a book about his father's disappearance 20 years ago. One day he receives a reader's email asking whether his father's bicycle disappeared as well. Perplexed and amused, Cheng decides to track down the bicycle, which was stolen years ago. The journey takes him to a scavenger's treasure trove, the mountain home of an Aboriginal photographer, deep into the secret world of antique bicycle collectors, and ultimately to his own heart. And I just thought that sounded really intriguing and really sweet and would be something that I would enjoy. Next up is Before We Were Yours, and this is by Lisa Wingate, and I heard about this from Sarah over at Sarah's Nightstand. She talked about this in her April wrap up, and this I believe centres around a couple of girls who I think were kidnapped, or they were in a children's home and then they were sort of illegally given to a family and treated really badly, sort of something along those lines. Sarah described it as a really emotional book, really hard-hitting, quite dark at times, but also really well written. So I thought that sounded like exactly something that I would like to read. Next up is This Will Be My Undoing, and this is by Morgan Jenkins, and I heard about this over on Cassie's channel, and she's from Bookish Four Eyes, and this was in her April wrap up. And the subtitle for this is Living at the Intersection of Black, Female and Feminist in White America. So this seems like it's a non-fiction book, and yeah, it's Morgan Jenkins writes. It's a collection of linked essays which interweaves her incisive commentary on pop culture, feminism, black history, misogyny and racism with her own experiences to confront the very real challenges of being a black woman today. And Cassie had good things to say about it, and I thought it sounded like I would learn a lot from it, so I added it to my wish list. Next up is Not That Bad, and this is edited by Roxane Gay, and I saw Roxane Gay tweet about this a few weeks ago and I thought it sounded really interesting. So this says that it's an anthology, and Roxane Gay collects original and previously published pieces that address what it means to live in a world where women have to measure the harassment, violence and aggression they face, and where they're routinely second-guessed, blown off, discredited, denigrated, besmirched, belittled, patronised, mocked, shamed, gaslit, insulted and bullied for speaking out. So there's a load of different female writers that are contributing to this, including Gabrielle Union, Amy Jo Burns and of course Roxane Gay herself. So again, sounded like I would learn a lot from it, and so I added that one. Another one that I saw on Twitter and thought I really should get around to adding that to my wish list is Wild Beauty, and this is by Anna Marie McLemore, and this is by, I believe, a sort of magical realism-esque YA book that focuses around flowers in a garden and something to do with The Garden Coming Alive or something like that. The cover is absolutely stunning. To be honest, I haven't heard a lot of people review this one, so I don't know exactly what people think of it, but it sounded like it might be something I would enjoy, and like I said, the cover's absolutely stunning. Next up I have 100 Nasty Women of History by Hannah Jewell, and Lauren from Lauren in the Books talks about this in her April wrap up. Again, this is another one of those anthologies that talk about different women in history and kind of give you little snippets of their lives and things like that. And of course the Nasty Women sort of title comes from that really derogatory thing that Trump said about women. I think it was about Hillary Clinton, wasn't it? So yeah, obviously off of the back of that, and again in that vein, I've been really enjoying that sort of thing lately and thought I would add that one. Next up I have Picture Us in the Light, and this is by Kelly Loy Gilbert, and I heard about this on Natasha's channel from My Reading is Odd. She talked about this in her April wrap up, and I was immediately attracted to the cover of this one because again it's really bright, it's really beautiful, and it just looked really nice. And then obviously she gave it a really high rating in her wrap up, and this focuses around a main character called Danny. And he's always known that his parents have secrets, and then he discovers a taped up box in his father's closet, and they're filled with old letters and a file on a powerful Silicon Valley family, and he realises there's much more to his family's past than he ever imagined. And I think it's about him discovering the mystery behind these letters and about his family's past and things like that. And she gave it a really high rating, and I always trust her recommendations, so I added that one. Another one from that exact video is Night Shift, and this is by Stephen King. I have thought about reading Stephen King before but never really knew where to start. He's written so many books, and this is actually a collection of short stories that she really raved about. So I thought it might be an interesting one to start with, to kind of dip my toe into his writing and see whether I like his style. I think these are horror short stories. Again, I don't read a lot of horror either, but I'm willing to give it a go and see what I think. And again, from that same video, I have This Is Life, and this is by Dan Rhodes, and all I remember about this one is that it's set in Paris, and she talked about the fact that she lived in Paris a few years ago, and so she was really drawn to it because it talks about a lot of the places that she used to go, and she got really vivid memories of those places. And I love books set in Paris, so I thought this would be a good contemporary read to add to my wish list. Next up is A Girl Made of Stars, and this is by Ashley Blake Herring, and I heard about this one over on Kayla's channel from Books and Lala. She talked about this in her April wrap up and gave it a really good rating, and this I believe centres around two twins. I think there's a boy and a girl, and the girl Mara's best friend Hannah, and one day Hannah accuses Owen, who's the boy twin, of raping her, and it's about that sort of situation and who believes who, and the sort of trust and how that kind of plays out, and it really sounded good and Kayla gave it a good rating. Next up is Rainbirds, and this is by Clarissa Goanarwan, I think that's how you pronounce that, and Kate from Kate Phil talks about this in her April wrap up. This is again got an absolutely stunning cover. I love the use of colour on this, and she said nothing but good things about this. So this follows a character called Ren, and he's just finishing up with university when he receives news that his sister Kiko has died. So he flies back home to Akakawa to sort of figure out what happened to his sister and kind of get her affairs in order. And there seems to be something not quite right about the way that she died, so he's trying to kind of uncover what happened to her, and there are some sort of strange things going on in this particular area that she decided to live in, and he's kind of trying to figure those things out. So again, Kate gave this loads of praise, and I thought it sounded really interesting. Next up is Darling, and this is by Rachel Edwards, and Dave talked about this in his April wrap up. This is Dave from Wild Reads, and he had really good things to say about it. This is apparently a new thriller, and this tells the story of Lola and her new stepmother, who's called Darling, I think, and they don't really get along very well, and I think Darling's only been with her dad for 3 months, and Darling is black, and one of the things that Lola can't get over is how her dad would fancy a black woman. And then equally Darling doesn't really like Lola that much because she seems quite spiteful and spoilt. And then kind of like it's about that relationship, and Lola wanted to get rid of Darling, and Dave had quite good things to say about it. So, and I quite like the kind of racial dynamic in there, so I added that one. Next up is The Terrorist at My Table, and this is by Imtiaz Darka. And I've lately been thinking about I should be getting into a bit more poetry. I do enjoy teaching it to my students at school, but I don't really read it personally. This is a collection where there's a poem that we study at school called Tissue as a part of it. It's one of her more recent collections. So I thought, I kind of looked it up at the library and saw whether I could get it, and I think I can. So I thought I would give this one a go and just sort of dip in and out of some of her poems and see whether I enjoy them. Next up is The Book of the Unnamed Midwife, and this is by Meg Ellison, and Emily at Possibly Literate talked about this in her April wrap-up. So this focuses around a world where a lot of women and children have died, and childbirth is quite deadly for both mother and infant, and so being a woman is quite a dangerous thing in this particular world, and it focuses around this main character who's a midwife and her trying to navigate her way through this world. So she has to dress up as a man and things like that. It sounded, Emily described it as being sort of in the vein of The Handmaid's Tale and that sort of thing, so that's why I added that one to my wish list. Next up is The Best We Could Do, and this is by Taboo, and Doris from All the Books talked about this one in her April wrap-up. And this is an illustrated memoir, and it focuses around a family who who are displaced from their home country, so they have to escape after the fall of South Vietnam in the 1970s. Do they come to America? I don't really know, but anyway, it's about the difficulties they face building new lives for themselves, and this is illustrated. I don't really read a lot of graphic novels or illustrated novels or anything like that, but Doris had really good things to say about this one, so I thought I would give it a go. Next up is The Fish Girl, and this is by Mirandi Ruo, and this again, Doris talked about this one in her April wrap-up, and it sounded quite good. It's quite a short book apparently, but she said it really kind of packed a punch. And this is about the Indonesian girl whose life is changed irrevocably when she moves from a small fishing village to work in the house of a Dutch merchant. There she finds both hardship and tenderness as her traditional past and colonial present collides. So that sort of dynamic sounded really interesting, and I thought I would give that one a go as well. And lastly, from that wrap up, she talked about The Dragon Behind the Glass, and this is by Emily Voigt. And the subtitle of this one is A True Story of Power Obsession and the World's Most Coveted Fish. So I think it is about the dragonfish and sort of like the history behind it and how people have coveted it over the sort of years, and yeah, again she had good things to say about this one. Next up is The Two Kinds of Decay, and this is by Sarah Manguso, and Sophie from Portal in the Pages talked about this in one of her recent reads videos. So this is, I think, another non-fiction book, and it's sort of like got a medical sort of edge to it. So it focuses around Sarah, and in her 20s, I think it is, she gets an autoimmune disease which appears suddenly and tears through her 20s, paralysing her for weeks, programming her first to expect nothing from life and then furiously to expect everything. And so she talks about sort of like the trials and tribulations of having this particular illness, and it sort of sounded like it was in the vein of Brain on Fire and things like that, and that I would quite enjoy it. Next up is The Royal We, and this is by Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, and Chelsea over at Chelsea Darling Reads recently did a bookshelf tour, and she sort of like, again, sort of picked books off of her shelves that she really enjoyed, and I'd never heard her talk about this particular one before, so I thought I would look it up. And this I think is one of her more recent sort of buys, because when you look at the description on Amazon, it says celebrate Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding with this fun and dishy raw romance about an American girl finding her prince. I think Chelsea read this. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it sounded like it would be quite sweet. Yeah, we're kind of in wedding fever at the moment. I'm filming this on Saturday, and I spent a couple of hours of my morning this morning watching the wedding, and it was just so lovely. Yeah, I just really wanted to see her dress and watch the ceremony and revel in the pomp and ceremony and all of the British traditions that we have, and it was really nice. I know some people aren't big fans of the royal family, but I quite like the royal family. I quite like the tradition and the kind of history behind them and things like that, and it was just lovely watching a wedding basically. So yeah, this kind of got me thinking about that again, although there were some t-shirts in Sainsbury's a couple of days ago, and they were kind of like marry me instead Harry and things like that, and just kind of that shouted desperation to me. Anyway, I'd never wear anything like that. So yeah, it's just been funny how we've been preparing for the royal wedding, let's say. But yeah, this book kind of sounded like it would be a fun time, so I thought I would give it a go. And lastly, we have The Darkest Child, and this is by Dolores Phillips, and I heard about this one from Russell over at Ink and Paper blog. He talks about this in his May book haul. So the description of this one says, Pakersfield, Georgia, 1958. 13-year-old Tangi May Quinn is the 6th of 10 fatherless siblings. She's the darkest skinned among them, and therefore the ugliest in her mother Rozelle's estimation. But she's also the brightest. Rozelle, beautiful, charismatic and light-skinned, exercises a violent hold over her children. Fearing abandonment, she pulls them from school at the age of 12 and sends them to earn their keep for the household, whether in domestic service, in the fields or at the farmhouse on the edge of town, where Rozelle beds local men for money. But Tangi May has been selected to be part of the first integrated class at a nearby white high school. She has a chance to change her life, but can she break from Rozelle's grasp without ruinous or even fatal consequences? So I thought the description of that one sounded really, really interesting. Again, something I'd learn a lot from, and I definitely added that one. So there you go guys, they were all of the books that I added to my wish list in May. Bumper month again. Well done if you've reached the end of the video. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below if you've read any of these and what you thought of them, or if you have any other recommendations from me, please leave them in the comments below as well. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.